Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Ready when you are.
Okay, great. Today, we are taking a look at Wardley Mapping and gameplays.
It's a fascinating way to visualize and strategize, really, for any business, any landscape.
Yeah, we say it's for A and Y business, and we mean it. And that's what we really want to dig into today. How can we give you some practical takeaways? We're going beyond just defining terms.
Absolutely.
We're taking introduction to Wardley Mapping gameplays, and we're going to see what we can apply today.
Yeah, we want to give you something that you can use.
Yeah, so let's start by sort of breaking down what this Wardley map is in the first place. We can say it's visual,
Yeah.
like a flowchart.
Yeah, it is a visual, kind of a map or a diagram,
Mhm.
but it's really about revealing how your business works and how it can evolve.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It's dynamic. So we're not just talking about a snapshot. We're talking about how things change over time.
It's that evolution, how the landscape shifts and how components mature. That's where the real power lies.
And this idea of maturity, it's fascinating, right? I mean, every business has its pieces, but it's how those pieces are evolving that can really impact your strategy.
And that's what the Wardley map captures so well. It has this evolution axis, which you can think of as a timeline that shows how components move from being brand new ideas in Genesis to
Yeah.
becoming widely available commodities, almost like utilities.
So something like, I don't know, a new software that a company develops might start in Genesis, but the cloud computing service they use to run it, that's probably a commodity by now.
Exactly. And recognizing where different parts of your business sit on the spectrum, from Genesis to commodity, that's incredibly powerful for making decisions.
It's like understanding, do you build this yourself? Do you buy it off the shelf? Maybe you outsource it entirely. So we've got this evolution timeline, but the map itself, it needs some anchors, right? Like, what are we actually mapping onto this thing?
Well, you start with the most important thing, the user need. It's all about the why behind what you do. If you're a streaming service, that need might be easy access to entertainment. It's the bedrock of your entire map.
So you're saying without that clearly defined need, you're basically, strategically lost at sea.
Pretty much. And from that user need, you then map out the value chain, which is basically all the activities that go into satisfying that need.
Okay, so far so good. But how does that actually work in the context of this map?
Well, imagine you've got that streaming service we talked about. At the top of your Wardley map, you'd have the things that are highly visible to the customer, like the user interface, how easy it is to find what you're looking for. Then, as you move down the map, you get to those components that are still crucial, but they're more behind the scenes, like maybe the content licensing agreements or the technology that's encoding those videos for streaming.
So each component, whether it's front and center or behind the curtains, gets plotted on this map based on both its visibility and where it sits on that evolution axis that we were talking about.
You got it. And when you put it all together like that, you start to see these really interesting patterns emerge. You might see dependencies that you never even realized were there. Or you might spot bottlenecks that are slowing you down.
It's like connecting the dots, but on a strategic level.
Right.
You suddenly see your business in a whole new light.
Exactly. And that's when you can really start to leverage those insights.
But this is before we've even touched on gameplays.
Right.
This is just the mapping part.
This is just the beginning.
All right, well, I am already seeing things in a new way, so we're going to take a quick break. We will be back in a moment. Okay, so we've got our map, right? We've laid out all the moving parts. We see how they're evolving, where they stand in terms of what the customer sees.
It's a powerful visual, that's for sure.
It is, but it's time to actually, make some moves, and that's where I think gameplays comes in.
Exactly. The Wordly map shows you the playing field. Gameplays are about how you use that understanding to your advantage.
So it's like, we've done our recon, we know the terrain, and now it's time to, deploy the troops. Strategically, of course.
I like that analogy. And just like in a real battle, you have different types of maneuvers, each with its own purpose and potential outcome. Some gameplays might be about accelerating how fast a component evolves, like maybe you invest heavily in R&D, or you might focus on slowing down a competitor, like building up a strong patent wall.
So there's a whole playbook of these strategic moves, which is amazing. And, our source material, it actually categorizes these gameplays, right?
It does, and here's where it gets interesting. It uses the Dungeons & Dragons alignment system as a framework.
Now, I've heard of Dungeons & Dragons, who hasn't? But I never thought I'd see it applied to business strategy.
It might seem like a strange pairing, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Those classic D&D alignments, lawful good, chaotic neutral, true neutral, they each represent a different ethical and strategic approach. And we can map those pretty directly onto business gameplays.
So let's say you've got a lawful good company. They might gravitate toward gameplays that benefit everyone, like investing in open source technologies that move the whole industry forward.
Exactly. They're playing the long game, building trust, and creating a more valuable ecosystem. On the flip side, a company with a more chaotic neutral approach might be all about disrupting the market, even if it ruffles some feathers along the way.
So their gameplays might be a bit more unpredictable, maybe even a little risky, but with the potential for big rewards if they make the right moves. And then you've got true neutral, which I'm guessing is all about.
Playing by the rules of the market. They're focused on their own gains, but not necessarily out to harm anyone. They might use gameplays that revolve around strategic partnerships, mergers, or acquisitions.
Okay, so we've got this really interesting framework for understanding gameplays. But how does this actually play out in the real world? Our source material uses a case study to bring this to life, right?
It does. Let's imagine a company called Techno Gadget Inc. They're a mid-sized tech company. Their flagship product is a smart thermostat. They're doing pretty well, but the market's getting crowded, and they're looking to expand internationally.
Sounds like they're at a crossroads, so perfect time to break out the Wardley Map and see what kind of gameplays could give them an edge.
Exactly. And the first step is to define their user need. Let's say it's a comfortable home environment with energy efficiency. That's the core value proposition of their smart thermostat.
Makes sense. So how do we start mapping out TechnoGadget's business using this framework? Where do we even begin?
We start by identifying the key components of their value chain. You've got the smart thermostat itself, obviously, but we also have to think about their mobile app, the cloud infrastructure that powers everything, their data analytics capabilities, customer support, R&D, even things like their API for third-party integrations.
Wow, that is a lot to consider. So each of these components, we would then place them on the map based on their visibility to the customer and where they fall on that evolution axis we talked about.
Exactly. So the smart thermostat itself, that's highly visible to the customer and probably somewhere in the product phase of evolution. Their cloud infrastructure, on the other hand, that's less visible, but likely much further along, probably closer to commodity.
This is where I think that visual aspect becomes so powerful, right?
Yeah.
We can literally see how everything is connected, how each piece relates to their overall strategy. But let's bring it back to those gameplays. What are some actual moves that TechnoGadget could make based on this map?
Well, they could try what we call an ecosystem play by partnering with other smart home device manufacturers. The idea is to create a more integrated experience for their customers.
Instead of just a thermostat, they become part of a larger smart home ecosystem. Very cool. What else?
They could go with what we call a user perception play. Maybe they start bundling their thermostat with other energy-saving products like smart light bulbs or power strips.
So they're not just selling gadgets, they're selling a solution, a whole philosophy even. I like it. What about those accelerator and de-accelerator gameplays that our source material mentioned? Could those work for TechnoGadget?
Absolutely. Since they're a tech company, an accelerator play might be opening up their thermostat's API to encourage third-party app development.
So they become a platform, not just a product. That's a powerful shift. And a de-accelerator.
That one's always a bit trickier, ethically speaking. It could involve things like lobbying for regulations that make it harder for competitors to enter the market.
Okay, maybe not the most ethical move, even if it's a common gameplay. What about leveraging those data analytics capabilities you mentioned? Could they play a role?
Definitely. That's where a market play comes in. They could use their data to give customers personalized insights and recommendations, make their thermostat stand out from the competition.
So they become the smartest thermostat on the market, not just in terms of features, but in how well it helps people understand their energy usage. Brilliant. But remember, they also want to expand internationally. Any gameplays that could support that ambition?
For that, they could opt for what we call a positional play, basically moving quickly into new markets before their competitors gain a foothold. This might involve partnering with local distributors or even setting up manufacturing in strategic locations.
It's like a global game of chess. TechnoGadget needs to make its moves carefully. But realistically, wouldn't doing all these gameplays at once take a ton of resources?
That's exactly the point. Not every gameplay is right for every situation. TechnoGadget needs to really look at its strengths, its weaknesses, the resources it has available, and of course, its risk tolerance.
So it's not just about following a formula blindly. The Wardley Map and these gameplays, they're tools for informed decision-making.
Exactly. And it all comes back to constantly reevaluating your position, adapting to how the market changes, being willing to shift your game plays as needed.
This has been an incredible look at strategic thinking. We're going to take one more quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap things up with some key takeaways and some final food for thought. Okay, so we've explored Wardley mapping and game plays, learned about evolution axes and D&D alignments. I have to say, it's a lot to process, but in a good way.
It's definitely a different way of looking at things, but that's kind of the point, right? To shake things up, challenge those assumptions.
Exactly. But you know what I really appreciate about this framework? You don't need an MBA to actually use it.
That's the beauty of it. It's accessible to anyone willing to put in a little effort, a little thought. So let's recap. For everyone listening, what are those key takeaways? Starting with the Wardley map itself, what is it really about?
It's about getting that visual representation of your business. But it's not just a static picture, is it?
Not at all. It's about seeing the evolution, the movement, understanding how all those different components of your business, they're not just isolated elements, they're all interconnected and evolving over time. And by plotting them out based on their visibility to the customer and where they are on that evolution axis.
We start to see those dependencies, those potential bottlenecks, the things that might trip us up or, the opportunities that we might otherwise miss. It really is like having X-ray vision for your business strategy.
Exactly. And once you have that clarity, that's where those gameplays come in.
Right, because knowledge without action is, well, it's not all that useful.
Ugh.
So thinking back to that D&D framework, we've got lawful good businesses that might lean toward win-win gameplays, things like open source collaborations, providing amazing educational resources for their customers.
Chaotic neutral companies, on the other hand, might be more drawn to those disruptive gameplays, the ones that shake things up, even if it makes a few people nervous.
And then there's that whole spectrum in between. But the key is understanding those different approaches, weighing the risks and rewards, and choosing the gameplays that really align with your values as a company, what you're ultimately trying to achieve.
And never forgetting that the business world, it's constantly changing. What works today might not work tomorrow. So you have to be adaptable, ready to pivot, adjust your gameplays as needed.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to something you said earlier, that you don't have to be a seasoned executive, a veteran strategist, to actually benefit from these tools.
Not at all. I mean, try sketching out a basic Wardley map for your own work, even a personal project. See what happens. Ask yourself, where are the dependencies? Where are the potential bottlenecks? What gameplays could I use to get ahead?
It's about asking those tough questions, challenging your own assumptions, and really opening yourself up to a whole new way of thinking about strategy.
Precisely.
So our challenge to you, dear listener, is to give it a try. You might be surprised by what you discover, those hidden opportunities that emerge when you start thinking like a strategic architect.
And who knows, might even have some fun along the way.
That is the goal. Well, on that note, this has been another incredible deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the world of Wardley mapping and gameplays as much as we have. Until next time, keep those strategic brains engaged, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.